And we're live. Hey everyone, it's Brian with TinyCryptoBlog. It has been a long while since I have posted any videos or uploaded anything other than maybe even just a short, mainly because there's been nothing happening. I mean, obviously, there's been things happening, but in general, there's not really that much happening. We're kind of going sideways in a price range, and who knows where it'll lead. There's the analogy I would best describe it is when European sailors were sailing to North America or to the Western Hemisphere. They came across a region in the lower Atlantic where there were no winds. The water was just still. It was referred to as, it's known today as the doldrums. And it's also known as the horse latitudes because a lot of horses were dumped over dead into there. They ran out of feed. And for whatever reason, they didn't eat the horses. I don't know. I don't know the full story, but I just remember as a wee young lad reading books that mentioned that. And I feel like that's where we've been in the space. It's been the doldrums, where there's things going on, but in the big picture, and especially with Bitcoin, it's been quiet and there's not been a lot going on. So there really hasn't been that much for me to expand on and talk about in depth. And it's been more content wise, kind of like peripheral issues, macro issues, and that sort of thing, which is what I'm going to be going into tonight, which is macro issues. And yeah, and then taking care of things on the home front with focusing on the garden and upgrading the landscaping. And so the attention's been elsewhere. But that all said, let's go into the video here. So Chris Martenson, if you don't, let's update our banner. Thank you. Chris Martenson, I'll do this kind of as a reaction thing. He is sort of a preparedness guy. And he focuses on just thinking a few steps ahead. One of the things he was really good about was his reporting on COVID. Now, he did have some bias on that stuff, but as we've seen, a lot of the things have turned towards the favor of his opinion and viewpoints. But he did point out a lot of points that were suppressed, dismissed, etc., etc. Well, anyway, he runs the Peak Prosperity website where it's all about looking ahead, being prepared, being mindful, and looking at stuff. And he had a video come out talking about the debt spiral and how things work with the US dollar. And I might skip ahead, but I might just end up playing the whole thing itself. So let it rip.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Chris Martenson of Peak Prosperity. Today, we're going to be discussing this ridiculous looking chart here, which is when we're looking at comparing in purple the federal interest payments compared to black, which is, well, the out of control defense budget, which, you know, is has anything to do with defense, like I don't know, like Jeffrey Dahmer has to do with, you know, safe food handling tips. We got to talk about this, but first we got to go to something where we have to understand the basic background of this. So let's look at this. I wrote here, well, let's look at this. Asashi's Joshi said, in just 6 years, from 2016 to 2021, the people on Earth have consumed over 75% of what we did over the entire 20th century. That means in just 6 years, we've consumed the same amount, 3/4 of the same amount that was consumed over an entire century. How can this be? This is overconsumption they're blaming it on. So it's just, we're just consuming more. It's just how it is. And here you can see, let me shrink this down a little so it fits. Wrong way. Yeah. Here you can see everything we've consumed in an entire century here, and pull this over a tiny bit so we can see all of it. I guess this is what? Tons of crap. Metric tons. Yeah. 600 billion, 700 billion metric tons. This is how much metric tons of stuff we have consumed in just 6 years. Now, how can this be? How can it be that we consumed 75% in 6 years of what took an entire century to consume? Well, I wrote here because this is how exponential functions work. And if you know, you know.
And that's another thing with exponential functions. He's going to use an analogy, the baseball field, which talks about compound interest and talks about it's a good way to frame things. So let's continue.
So for those of you who haven't familiarized yourself with this, we should go now to this, which is I created something called the Crash Course a number of years ago, and it's still one of my best pieces of work. If you like my work, you're going to want to see the Crash Course completely free. I decided the whole world needed to see it for free, so I produced it, put it out there, and it sits there, and it's every bit as good as any of the COVID reporting I did. It really will change how you think. Now, here's an example. This is just 3 minutes of material. Once you understand this function, this will change everything about how you see the world once you internalize it. So let's listen in.
The presentation is to help you understand the power of compounding. If something, such as a population, oil demand, a money supply, anything, steadily increases in size as a proportion of its current size, you get a graph that looks like this, a hockey stick. Said more simply, if something is increasing over time on a percentage basis, it's growing exponentially. Using an example drawn from a magnificent paper by Dr. Albert Bartlett, let me illustrate the power of compounding to you. Suppose I had a magic eyedropper and I placed a single drop of water in the middle of your left hand. The magic part is that this drop of water is going to double in size every minute. At first, nothing seems to be happening, but by the end of a minute, that tiny drop is now the size of 2 tiny drops. After another minute, you now have a little pool of water that is slightly smaller in diameter than a dime sitting in your hand. After 6 minutes, you now have a blob of water that would just fill a thimble. Now, suppose we take our magic eyedropper to Fenway Park, and right at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, we place a magic drop way down there on the pitcher's mound. To make this really interesting, suppose that the park is watertight and that you are handcuffed to one of the very highest bleacher seats. My question to you is this. How long do you have to escape from the handcuffs? Days, weeks, months, years? How long would that take? I'll give you a few seconds to think about it.
Just wait.
The answer is you have until 12:49 on that same day to figure out how you're going to get out of those handcuffs. In less than 50 minutes, our modest little drop of water has managed to completely fill Fenway Park. Now let me ask you this. At what time of the day would Fenway Park still be 93% empty space? And how many of you would realize the severity of your predicament? Any guesses? The answer is 12:44. If you were squirming in your bleacher seat, waiting for help to arrive, by the time the field is covered with less than 5 feet of water, you would now have less than 5 minutes left to get free. And that right there illustrates one of the key features of compound growth. The one thing that I want you to take away from all of this, with exponential functions, the action really only heats up in the last few moments. We sat in our seat for 44 minutes, nothing much seemed to be happening, and then in 5 minutes, bang, the whole place was full. This example is loosely based on a wonderful paper by Dr. Albert Bartlett that clearly and cleanly describes this process of compounding, which you can find in our essential reading section. Dr. Bartlett said, the greatest shortcoming of the human race is the inability to understand the exponential function. And he's absolutely right. With this understanding, you'll begin to understand the urgency I feel. There's simply not a lot of maneuvering room once you hop on the vertical portion of a compound graph. Time gets short.
I'll leave that there. So that's the not that one. That one. So
And here we go, right here. This is comparing spending on the military in black and the spending on interest owed on the total federal debt. Now, granted, in his Fenway Park analogy, we're talking a compound rate of 100%. So yes, things will fill up quick. However, even if we scale back, the overall percentage of growth, it still compounds. It still grows exponentially, just at a slower rate. And with interest rates where they're at, and with the amount, we're not even at a point where the debt is stable and say, okay, we're at $1 trillion a year. it's growing faster and faster. And a big part of that is this, the interest expense. The interest that we owe is growing. And so we need to keep an eye on this and figure out what is it going to reach a point that when we reach a point where the interest owed is exceeding the ability to pay, we are truly effed. Because at that point, we've reached that point of no return and we are not coming back. It is devaluation and default. And with the end of this petrodollar deal, I haven't read the details of it, but apparently it was the whole original scheme of buying and selling, trading oil using dollars, and for buying our currency will protect you, will provide protection to the oil states. Well, they basically were at a point where they said, nope, we're kind of done with this. So we're going to see less demand for the currency. When there's something that has less demand, the value, the price of each unit goes down. So that's additional drop in demand. When you have a situation like we've had where new money is constantly being created and diluting the value of the units currently in existence, whether it's in your bank account, in your paycheck, or in some sort of asset or investment that you own, it's being devalued. And we're at a point where it's just going further and further and faster. And I don't know what this is going to mean and what kind of a timeline we're on. But more and more, it's got me saying, have you built your ark? Have you done something to put your money into things outside of dollar-denominated assets, or even just dollars, assets that are dollars? Numismatics, digital assets, physical, tangible things. These are all options that should be considered. Even in yourself, spending money on yourself to acquire new skills, or to Charles Hugh Smith. Actually, I'm going to look this up. He has I believe it was 7 forms of capital, where it's not just monetary capital. Here's a good one. I'll open up this one. 7 forms of capital. Then this was, oh yeah, an old one that I come across a long time ago. So, need you to open up, sir. All right. Take it back and minimize me. You've got financial capital, which we're all pretty familiar with, but you also have social capital, meaning goodwill with neighbors, rapport, trust, relationships. Spiritual capital, natural capital. Let's go over to this one instead. Here we go. Eight forms of currency. Social capital, which are your connections and relationships. Material capital, natural resources, tools, buildings, infrastructure. Financial capital, how's this one looking? Let's zoom this in. There we go. Financial capital, which is our money. Living capital, which is, land, soil, organisms. Intellectual capital, ideas and knowledge. If you know how to fix a furnace, if you know how to grow vegetables, if you know how to do something, you have some sort of a skill, especially a technical skill, that gives you something to add as capital, where you can leverage it with your social capital and your connections. Say, hey, I can grow food. If you're in a Teotihuacan situation and you need to grow food, your neighbors could hire you to be the farmer. and they offer something in return. But that would be your sustenance, is that you provide that intellectual capital via your social capital to leverage that. Experiential capital, experience, wisdom, that ties in with intellectual, ties into the others, spiritual, and then again cultural capital, which is a lot like social capital. So even if you're teaching yourself something to learn a skill, learn something technical, learn an ability, joining clubs, whatever it is, anything that builds up these forms of capital, that's definitely to your benefit. And it's money invested in yourself. And then by extension, all the communities that you are a part of, whether it's neighbors, whether it's social groups, whatever it might be. So I feel like more and more, it's like Noah's Ark. Have you started making your financial ark? Because worst case scenario, you're going to have a really cool boat that you're never going to need to use, and you could probably just have a party on. Best case scenario, you'll be in a position where you'll be able to minimize the amount of financial damage and impacts and blows that you'll incur versus people that don't have that, or if you didn't have any. So there's definitely a benefit to now is definitely the time to be thinking about that sort of thing. So this particular video sort of ties in with that, where I think it's another signal out there and something to a bit of perspective, or just a piece of information to put into perspective and think about when you're looking at things. Okay, how can this compound? How could this speed up and happen suddenly and catch everyone off guard? Because I remember 2008, that unfolded rather quickly. I can't think of any other large financial incidents, but yeah, that's the really bad news started in the spring, and by summertime, the fit hit the shan. Oof, I don't know, if you remember those days or not, but yeah. So now is the time to at least be building up that arc. And also, too, even when we get past this period in time, it'll give you its own form of capital and currency, because you'll be learning about diversification, and that's knowledge and experience that you can pass on to other people. You can be the one that helps people, just like I'm doing with you, to say, hey, have you thought about this? Have you considered these things? Something to think about. So I think I will wrap it up this week. I feel like I've said what needs to be said. I do not know when things will be posted. If you follow along at TINYCRYPTOBLOG.com, on one of the Sunday posts, I pretty much said, with things as quiet as they are, I will post articles whenever something comes up that's really worth mention and of note, that has an effect as far as adoption, or has an effect as far as our freedom, our personal freedom and financial freedom. Otherwise, it'll be quiet sailing. So, appreciate you hanging around. And yeah, you can follow along at all the social. Oh boy, you can follow along at all the links in the show notes. And with that, everyone, I will say, be well, everyone. Talk to you soon. And we are out.